Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. Today I want to talk about two spells. Very specifically, two spells that I'm kind of using wrong or have used wrong in the game, but that the flavor of them is so great that using them wrong has kind of made the game better. Now, I say wrong, meaning that if you look rules lawyery at each of these two spells we're going to talk about, you might be able to find holes in my techniques of things I've allowed as a GM and things I've done as a player. So I just thought it'd be fun to dig into this. I originally had written, I played D&D wrong, but as I look into it, I'm not playing it that wrong. So let's talk. So these two spells are Telekinesis and Rock to Mud. So if you've got stories about using these spells, let me know in the comments below. But let's just start off with a little story. So I don't know if I've ever talked about this specifically here on this channel, but my very first experience with Dungeons & Dragons was this. I was maybe 8 years old and was at my cousin's house, like their cottage actually. We all shared. A bunch of our families had summer cottages in the same area. So I was there in the living room and gathered around the big dining room table. You know, it was the early 80s. So like there was one of those tables that like had the extensions that spread it out. Were all my like older cousins and my brothers and sisters because I was the youngest. And they were gathered around playing a game. They had paper, they had dice, and they were basically telling a story from what I could tell and going through an adventure. In the end, this was Dungeons & Dragons, but one of the things that always stuck with me was at some point during that adventure, one of the player characters got their hands on a ring of telekinesis. Now, I had never even heard of this word before, but effectively, the dungeon master explained to them that they could pick things up, with the ring, remotely, with their mind, right, and move them around. And they could use the ring to lift people, to move stones, whatever. Well, at some point during the adventure, they had come into this cavern that had like a lot of, I want to say it was undead, a bunch of skeletons, I remember that, and they were hopelessly outnumbered. And the player that had the ring picked up a skeleton. And instead of just throwing the skeleton, at another enemy, which seems reasonable, they lifted the skeleton high up in the air and started the skeleton spinning around in circles. Okay? And they did it over and over again as the fighters or other people, I didn't know what a fighter was, were holding off the enemy. And then at a certain point, the skeleton was going faster and faster and faster. They spun it back down into the group of, 100 skeletons in this room, as you can imagine. And it like blew them all up to smithereens and the party was able to escape. And I thought, this is amazing. This is the kind of game I want to play. And when we look at telekinesis, by the rules, if you will, I was looking at the expert book the other day. Telekinesis allows you to pick up a certain weight and move it at, I want to say it's 20 feet per round. So 20 feet per second is not very fast. It's about 2 miles an hour, roughly. Somebody can check my math on that. I did a little Googling. And, if you were throwing a skeleton at me at 2 miles an hour and I saw it coming, I probably could just step out of the way, right? It's not like it's something that would be that incredibly dangerous, really. I mean, if unless you didn't see it coming. AD&D, of course, actually does what this person did on some level. The longer you move something, the faster you can make it go. So this may have been where they were able to kind of come up with the idea of doing it. The thing is, combat rounds in AD&D are 1 minute long. And in order to get the skeleton going fast enough to cause the damage it could go, it probably would have been like 20 minutes, if you think about the rules the way they are. But it felt like, the story seemed like it was only, maybe a minute or two, right? And I think this is kind of the core of what I'm getting at here, is that sometimes when we're using abilities or, magic items in this case, we have to kind of lean into the fantasy of it. And granted, there's rules, right? And the rules are there for a reason, to not make things unbalanced, not make things overpowered. But at the same time, how cool is it to pick up a skeleton and whip it around and destroy like 100 skeletons with it, right? I'm sure that when the dungeon master presented this idea that this room was full of skeletons, it was supposed to be like impassable. There's 100 skeletons. How are you going to fight all these skeletons? The player was clever. The dungeon master, who was one of my cousins, allowed it to happen. I can't remember who the player was. And basically, they looked at what the rules said. They looked at what the spell said. They thought of what was awesome, and they just made it happen. And this is what I really love about this game. I think that I tend to gravitate towards games that are a little bit more rules light because it tends to be the type of game where you can get away with things like that. And I do feel like if you are playing with players and you are a DM that all have this shared world in mind, people will not often take advantage of this, because this is really the main argument against this kind of thing. I've heard it from many people when I say something like, I don't really want to do a skill system. I'll just say if you're a merchant, you can do merchant things. And then people will be like, well, what's a merchant thing? It's like, I don't know. You can trade, you can know about wealth of this. Yeah, but what about if my merchant was this or that or that? I've never had a player do that. They don't, because it's kind of, you just kind of look at them and go, really? Like that's how we're doing this. And basically, you've got to trust your players, right? You have to trust the players, and the players have to trust that you are going to let them have it sometimes, right? Let them have their moment where they can do a thing that's really awesome, right? And just in case you're curious, because I looked at the AD&D spell, if you were to maintain it long enough, I don't know how many rounds, I didn't do that math, to get to the maximum speed, it's basically terminal velocity, which is pretty awesome when you think about it. But again, this would not have happened in a handful of combat rounds. It would have taken probably 20 rounds or something, right? And because of that, it just wouldn't have had that same awesome effect. So, that's one spell. The second spell, which I think is really interesting, and we used all the time as kids, was Rock to Mud. We were obsessed with this spell. The idea that you could turn an area into mud, right? So you've got this dungeon hallway, the monsters are chasing you, turn it into mud, so now they're kind of mired in it and they move really slow. Okay, cool. That's not how we always used it, right? We'd use it to pass through walls. We'd drop ceilings on people, right? I once had a player pretty recently in an actual place, you can see it happen, use it on the side of a tower to basically drop off half the side of a tower. And that is where this spell really becomes cool. When it was created, I'm sure the way it's written, if you just went by like what seems to be the intention, the spell is made to kind of stop things from chasing you or whatever, or slow them down if they're coming after you. Maybe if you're being chased by 100 goblins, or something, and you want to slow them down. But really, like, how many cool things can you do when you can turn rock to mud? The thing, you drop a bridge, right? Like, because again, the idea, it's like, oh, and it will eventually dry back up. But yeah, but if it's a stone bridge and you turn it to mud, that bridge is gone. It's awesome, right? You use it on the top of the ceiling of the dungeon right near a stalactite. Stalactites are the ones up in the air there, right? And it falls down and smashes on a monster and kills the dragon or whatever. This is how we use spells in a clever manner. And I think that we have to, again, let ourselves be free to use these and let it work, because this is a high-level spell and it should be devastating. Now, on the other end, there's Mud to Rock. I remember very distinctly playing as a kid where we would always couple these two spells together. We'd get a Ring of Spell Storing or a Scroll or something, or just be high enough level magic user, and you just want to memorize both those spells. Rock to Mud, Mud to Rock. And you'd be like, all right, the monsters are chasing us. Boom. You turn it to mud. They sink down to their waist in the mud. And then, boom, now it's stone. And hey, guess what? You guys are there forever. This was, again, a very common thing in how we defeated very powerful monsters, right? This Medusa's following. You can hear it coming around the corner. You can't look at it, right? But you just wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. Boom, you drop the ceiling on top of the Medusa. Then, boom, you turn it to that, the mud splashes down all over her. And then, boom, you turn it back to stone. Call that a reversal, right? These are clever uses of spells that maybe aren't by the book the right way to use them, or the way maybe they're intended. I'm not even sure what you're supposed to use telekinesis for if you can't throw stuff at people. And man, it's pretty slow when you think about that. But if one of my players says, I'm going to use telekinesis to flick a dagger at somebody across the room, they're going to flick that dagger. It's not going to float through the air. Come on. It's telekinesis. It should be cool, right? So let me know what you think. This was just kind of a random thought that I had written down in my notebook, and I was like, let me talk about this. Let me know if there's any other spells like this that if you actually look at the rule, maybe they're not quite as cool as they should be, so you just kind of let them be cooler, or if you think that's just not the way to do it because players will take advantage, or anything in between. I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Check the description. You'll find a link to my Discord server for even more conversations. I'll talk to you soon.